The wind had barely let up when she arrived, dust curling around her hem as she stepped off the borrowed mule, dressed in black from boots to bonnet. Her name, she said, was Mrs. Ada Jameson, recently widowed, traveling west to forget the pain. But the man who met her at the gate, a broad-shouldered rancher with a limp and eyes like weathered stone, knew the name was false. He didn't say so. Not then. He offered her water, a quiet nod, and a place in the old bunkhouse that hadn't held life in years. The girl didn't ask questions. She carried a satchel light as lies, and a calmness that didn't match the story she told. The ranch was quiet, just a few head of cattle, a dying dog, and a man too proud to show how badly the bullet in his side still burned. She noticed the way he winced when mounting the steps, the blood that bloomed beneath his shirt each morning. By the second night, she took over cooking. By the third, she boiled water and asked if she could look at the wound. He hesitated, then nodded once. Her hands were clean, confident, practiced. Not a widow, he thought, a nurse. But from where? Her fingers worked with quiet certainty, stitching torn flesh as if she'd done it in chaos before. Maybe on the floor of a battle-torn tent, maybe in places where names got people killed. "You done this before?" he asked, voice low, not accusing. She paused, then gave a small nod. "Long time ago." Her accent slipped when she said it. Southern, faint. He filed it away. Let her think he believed her. That night, while she scrubbed blood from the rag outside, he limped to the barn and pulled out a tin box beneath the floorboards. Inside, a folded flyer, worn at the creases, stained with time. A woman's sketch, eyes sharp, mouth tight, hair tucked beneath a cap. A wanted poster, 2 years old. Not for murder, not for theft. For aiding the escape of wounded native children during a cavalry raid. He looked out the window at her, kneeling at the stream, sleeves rolled to her elbows, jaw set like a soldier's. Not a criminal, not to him. Maybe to the law, but not to him. He folded the poster again, slower this time, and slipped it back into the box. That night, as she placed the stitched-up bandage across his ribs and tightened the knot, he looked at her and asked gently, "You got anywhere else to go?" She didn't look up. Not anymore. And neither of them said what they both knew. This was the beginning. The mornings came colder on the ranch after her arrival. Not from the weather, but from the hush that lingered between them. Ada rose before first light, boiled water on the cast-iron stove, and left his coffee without asking how he liked it. He drank it all the same. There was a rhythm forming, soft as creek water, her sweeping the porch, him checking the cattle, both pretending they weren't watching each other through windows and silences. He hadn't told her his name yet, not formally. She hadn't asked. It was safer that way, like putting a lid on a pot that might boil over if touched. When he caught her staring at the wounded dog limping near the fence, she looked away quickly. But the next day she poured broth into a bowl and left it out. By the end of the week, the dog slept by her bunkhouse door. He noticed, of course. He noticed everything. The way she folded towels with the precision of a medic. The way she never flinched at blood. The way she pressed her lips when certain names were mentioned. Fort Lincoln, Sergeant Cook, the battle at Sand Hollow. She was hiding in plain sight, and he was letting her. The thing was, he knew what it meant to run. He'd once worn a uniform, too, rode with a badge on his chest until it got him shot in the back for refusing to fire on women and children. He hadn't worn a star since. Now the bullet was gone, but the limp stayed, just like guilt did. One evening, as dusk painted the hills in ash and amber, he came back from the shed with an old oil lantern and held it out to her. "Yours, if you want to stay in the bunkhouse longer," he said. She took it without a word, fingers brushing his calloused ones for a second too long. He didn't pull away. That night, a coyote howled too close to the fence and startled the horse. She stepped outside in her shawl, eyes scanning the darkness, rifle slung from the porch wall in her hands, like she'd used one 100 times before. When she saw him watching, she lowered it and shrugged. "Old habits," she murmured. He nodded. "Good ones." The fire inside the main cabin stayed small that night, but he didn't dampen it fully. Just in case. And when he sat at the table alone, he found himself glancing at the second plate he'd set out without thinking, waiting for the woman in black who didn't ask questions and hadn't told a single truth, but had somehow started making the place feel alive again. By the third week, her presence no longer felt like intrusion. It felt like punctuation, like something added to a life that had gone too long without pause. Ada moved through the ranch like she belonged to it, not in name, but in rhythm. She patched his shirts, mended a broken gate, and planted onions in the dry soil behind the bunkhouse, humming songs he didn't recognize. But it wasn't the songs that unsettled him. It was the way her eyes scanned the horizon too often, the way she kept the rifle close even when hanging laundry. One afternoon, while mending a saddle strap, he saw her crouched behind the barn, kneeling over something. When he came closer, he realized it was a letter. Not the kind sent, but the kind rewritten again and again, ink bleeding over older words, like she couldn't get it right. He didn't ask what it said. She didn't know he'd seen. That evening, he fetched a spare rifle from his own cabin and cleaned it on the porch. When she passed with an armful of firewood, he spoke without looking up. "You shoot to wound or to warn?" She paused. "Depends on who's asking." He looked up. "Say it's someone who has no business running you off this land." Her shoulders eased, just slightly. "Then I shoot to miss. The first time." He nodded, satisfied. "Good." The next day brought trouble. A dust-covered rider approached around noon, lean, twitchy, eyes flicking like a gambler's. He asked for water, then lingered too long, staring at Ada. She kept her face still, hands folded, but he saw the twitch in her fingers. "You from back east?" the man asked, eyes narrowing. "You look familiar." She offered a smile with no warmth. "I'm just the cook." The rancher stepped between them then, all shoulders in shadow. "You need a drink, take it, then ride on." The man hesitated, but the quiet steel in the rancher's voice was enough. He rode out, but not without one last glance. That night, Ada didn't eat. She sat outside, hands trembling slightly as she tried to sew, but the needle pricked her thumb again and again. Finally she gave up, burying her face in her hands. The rancher approached slow, carrying a tin cup of coffee. He didn't speak, just set it beside her and sat on the steps. After a while, she asked, "You think he recognized me?" "I think you scared him more than he scared you." She gave a bitter laugh. "I doubt that." He looked out at the stars. "You're not what they say you are." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Then what am I?" He answered without hesitation. "Still here." And somehow that was enough to steady her hands again. The next morning the ranch woke early with tension in the air, like the kind before a lightning storm. The rider from yesterday hadn't returned, but the fear he carried had sunk its claws into Ada's shoulders. She didn't say anything, but the way she scrubbed the porch steps, harder than they needed, told the story. The rancher didn't ask. He knew that silence could be as honest as confession. Around midday, a horse wandered in from the south trail. No rider, no saddle, no brand. Just a pale gray Mustang with tired eyes and foam dried on its flanks. Ada spotted it first and froze. The rancher came up behind her and took one long look. "That's not a wild one," he said. "That's a message." He walked slow, calm, offering oats from his palm. The horse didn't spook, just let its head drop, exhausted. "You think he's dead?" Ada asked, her voice smaller than usual. The rancher didn't answer right away. He checked the animal's hooves, found small stones embedded, ridden hard. "He might be," he said, "or someone left this on purpose." That night, Ada checked the windows 3 times before sleeping. She pulled the curtain aside as if expecting someone, but no shadows moved. In the dark, the bunkhouse felt too quiet, too far from the ranch house. Just before midnight, there was a knock. Gentle, not urgent. When she opened the door, the rancher stood with a lantern. "Take the bed inside tonight," he said. "I'll sleep out here." She blinked, confused. "Why?" "Just a hunch." He didn't wait for debate. He spread his bedroll outside her door and leaned the rifle beside him. She watched him through the window for a long time before finally lying down. Around 3 in the morning, the dogs barked. The rancher sat up without panic and waited. Hoofbeats, distant but approaching fast. Then a figure slowed near the fence line, just out of lantern range. The rancher stood, rifle in hand. "State your name," he called out. Silence. Then the figure turned and vanished back into the dark. The next morning he found a small cloth tied to the gatepost. Red. A warning. He brought it to Ada. She stared at it for a long time, then said, "They've found me." "No," he said firmly. "They've only seen you." She shook her head. "They won't stop now." He folded the cloth in half and tucked it into his pocket. "Then let's not wait for them to knock again." She met his eyes, scared but not broken. "You'd stand with me?" "No," he said. "I'll stand in front." And that was how she knew she wasn't running anymore. 2 days passed with no sign of riders, but neither of them slept right. Ada kept a pistol in her apron pocket, and the rancher rarely let the rifle leave his hand, even while mending the fence or feeding the cattle. Their words grew fewer, not from coldness, but from the weight of decisions hanging between them. That afternoon, a telegram rider came. Dusty, silent, and looking for nothing but a signature. The rancher met him at the gate, nodded, and came back with a folded slip in his hand. He read it once and didn't show it to her. But later that night, as they sat on the porch, he offered her a worn pencil and a blank envelope. "If there's someone you want to warn," he said, "now's the time." Ada stared at the envelope like it might burn her fingers. Then she whispered, "Not warn. Just explain." She sat at the table and began to write, slowly, scratching the words with uneven hands. The rancher didn't read over her shoulder, just listened to the quiet sound of ink on paper and the occasional pause when she bit her lip too hard. When she sealed the envelope, she handed it to him without meeting his eyes. "Address it to whoever you trust," she said. "I can't use my real name." He took it and said nothing for a while. Then he asked, "What name do you want to give them?" She hesitated. "I used to be Anna Merriweather," she said finally. "Before I was Ada. Before the wanted posters. That was my mother's name. It felt safe." He nodded and addressed it accordingly. Then he stood, stretched, and said, "We'll send it at dawn." She looked up at him, blinking. "You believe me now?" He leaned on the doorframe and looked out over the ranch. "I believed you the first time you sewed me up without flinching." That night, as the fire burned low and the winds picked up outside, she sat beside him in the main cabin. The dog curled at her feet. The warmth of the hearth touched her face in soft orange glow. She stared at the flames, then finally asked the question that had been circling her heart for weeks. Why haven't you turned me in?" He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet, like a prayer. "Because I know what it feels like to have the law forget what mercy is." She didn't speak, just let the words settle. And as the fire cracked softly between them, she realized something terrifying and beautiful. She didn't want to leave. Not anymore. The morning came colder than expected, with frost edging the window glass like spider silk. Ada stood on the porch, watching the rancher hitch the mule for the short ride into town. The envelope lay in his saddlebag, sealed and waiting to disappear into a rail sack. "Don't be long," she said, arms folded across her chest, though not from the cold. He nodded, tipping his hat. "Just long enough to mail a ghost." She watched him ride off until the dust swallowed his shape, then went back to the kitchen to keep her hands busy. She kneaded bread harder than the dough needed, stirred the beans until they boiled over. Anything to keep her mind from imagining what a telegram clerk might say if they recognized her handwriting. Meanwhile, the rancher rode slow into town, every creak of saddle leather reminding him of his leg and of the time he'd worn a badge. Those days were gone, but not forgotten. At the post office, he handed the letter to the clerk, using the same calm expression he wore when telling calves to hush in the night. He didn't look at the name again. Anna Merriweather was hers now, no matter what papers said. As he turned to leave, he caught sight of a man across the street. Tall, clean-shaven, wearing the silver star of a deputy. The man glanced up, noticed the rancher's limp, and nodded politely. The rancher returned the gesture, but his stomach tightened. He'd seen that face before. Fort Hollow Creek, 2 years back, when a woman in a nurse's uniform had pulled a half-dead Comanche boy from the field and vanished before the court-martials began. The deputy hadn't recognized him, but it meant one thing. They were closing in. Back at the ranch, Ada was hanging clothes when she saw the shape on the horizon. Her hands stilled. Her heart didn't. When the rancher arrived, she was already waiting by the barn, pistol in her skirt pocket. "They're getting close," he said before she asked. She didn't flinch. "I won't run." "I know. But you should send me away." "No." He dismounted and tied the mule. "I saw one of them. He didn't recognize me, but it won't take much." Ada reached for his hand without thinking, squeezing it once. "Then we stand." That night, they moved the horse into the barn, loaded the rifles, and bolted the doors. The air between them wasn't fear. It was readiness. Two people too tired to run and too stubborn to fall quietly. As they sat side by side near the fire, her voice broke the silence. "If they come, you don't have to lie." He looked at her, eyes steady. "I won't have to, not when the truth is on our side." The next morning brought no riders, but the silence felt like a breath held too long. Ada moved through the day as if nothing had changed, feeding chickens, sweeping ash from the hearth, folding the rancher's shirt sleeves at the wrist. But her eyes never left the trail that curved from the distant ridge. The rancher, too, kept a rifle leaned against every doorway and an extra saddlebag packed in the corner, though he hadn't said where he'd go if they had to run. Truth was, he wouldn't, not without her. By late afternoon, they were mending a broken fence post near the back pasture when they heard the sound. Hoofbeats. Not slow and lazy like a traitor, but focused, purposeful. One rider. The rancher didn't speak. He handed Ada the hammer and stepped forward, rifle already in hand. She followed, heart pounding like it had in the days after Sand Hollow, when she'd slept with her boots on and a knife under her cot. The rider came into view slowly, a man in brown canvas, dust on his collar, no badge on his chest but the kind of clean-shaven jaw that spoke law all the same. He stopped just outside the gate, tipped his hat. "Afternoon," he said. "Name's Deputy Rigg. Looking for someone?" The rancher nodded. Plenty of folks out this way. Who you after? The deputy pulled a folded paper from his saddlebag. Woman, Anna Merriweather, escaped custody 2 years back, aided in harboring injured tribesmen during the Hollow Creek incident. Ada stood behind the fence post, her breath shallow. The name sounded louder than the wind, louder than the creak of pine branches nearby. She felt the moment his eyes flicked to her. No recognition, just curiosity. You seen anyone new around here, sir? Rig asked, calm but probing. The rancher didn't blink. Got a widow staying in the bunkhouse, lost her husband to winter fever. Helps out around the place. Quiet woman. The deputy nodded slowly. Widow, huh? What's her name? The pause was only half a second, but it hung like a dropped rope. Then the rancher said, firm and smooth, Ada Jameson. Rig tilted his head, watching the woman behind the post. Mind if I speak with her? She's not a criminal, the rancher said, not loud but steady. And I'm not looking for trouble. Rig watched them both, weighing the silence. Then he tucked the paper away. If you hear anything, let us know. He turned his horse without another word. Ada didn't move until the hoofbeats vanished. Then she exhaled and whispered, You used the name I gave you. The rancher looked at her. Because it's the one that belongs to you now. And in that quiet, something shifted. She was no longer a guest. She was home. The days after the deputy's visit passed like a season on edge. They didn't speak of it again, but both kept glancing toward the ridge at odd hours, listening for the rhythm of hooves that might return too soon. Still, work continued. The fence was repaired, winter feed hauled, and firewood stacked high outside both cabins. They moved like people who had lived beside danger too long to flinch at every shadow. One evening, the rancher sat on the porch, sharpening his knife, the light of the lantern catching the edge with every stroke. Ada came out with a bowl of stew and set it beside him. You always sit with your back to the wall, she said. It wasn't a question. He glanced at her, eyes soft but unreadable. Old habit. You never asked what I did back then, she said, folding her arms, not in defense, but like someone bracing to be seen. I figured if you wanted me to know, you'd tell me. She looked down at her hands. They brought in Lakota boys. Shot up, starved, scared. They weren't soldiers, just children. I was supposed to treat them, then let them die in the corner. But I didn't. The rancher didn't interrupt. I stole bandages. Morphine. One night, I smuggled 3 out under a wagon tarp. They caught the 4th. Her voice cracked. That's when the posters went up. He set the knife down. You carry that like a scar. It is one. He nodded slowly. Good. The scars that stay are the ones that mattered. A silence stretched, warm but heavy. I can leave, she said finally. If they come back, if it puts you in danger. I've been in danger, he said. Lost brothers, land, blood. I stayed alive for something. Maybe this was it. She turned her face away, wiping her cheek with the back of her hand. Later that night, he brought her a folded bundle, old canvas, frayed but clean. Inside it, a holster and revolver, oiled and waiting. You'll need this, he said. I thought I wasn't supposed to run. He looked at her, quiet. It's not for running. She took it gently, then looked at him. You trust me? With this ranch, with my name, with the space beside my fire. She didn't answer right away. She just nodded, slipped the holster onto her belt, and for the first time since arriving, stepped into the main cabin without waiting to be invited. From that moment on, she never slept in the bunkhouse again. The smell of smoke came at dawn, faint but wrong, drifting through the canyon like a memory they hadn't invited. Ada stepped out of the main cabin barefoot, squinting towards the eastern ridge where the light was just beginning to touch the tops of the trees. Behind her, the rancher was already pulling on his boots, rifle in hand, not asking if she smelled it. He had. They moved together, quiet as ghosts, past the barn and toward the far fence line, where they found the first sign. A boot print, too deep, too fresh. Not theirs. Ada's hand hovered near her sidearm, and the rancher gave one small nod. They didn't speak on the way back, but the air between them had changed, charged, stretched like wire pulled tight. When they reached the porch, he handed her the second rifle, the heavier one, the one with the long barrel and steady kick. "If they come, they'll come wide," he said, "from the back. I'll circle to the blind rock. You stay here." She didn't argue. She simply loaded 2 extra rounds into her skirt pocket and tied her hair back with the leather cord he'd given her the day she arrived. Then she waited. An hour passed. 2. The sun was climbing now, burning off the smoke, but not the feeling. She knelt behind the porch post, the dog beside her, both of them watching the ridge like it might split open. Then came the crack, distant but sharp. 1 gunshot. Ada didn't flinch. She waited, breath held, until the second sound reached her. A low whistle, 3 short notes, the signal they'd agreed on. She rose and moved toward the barn slowly, rifle ready, but what she saw made her stop short. The rancher was dragging a man by the collar through the dust, blood on the stranger's arm, and rage in his limp. He dropped the man at her feet, looked her in the eye, and said, he was watching from the ridge. "Had this." From his coat, the rancher pulled a folded wanted poster. Her face, her name, the same ink-stained lie she'd been running from for 2 years. She stared at it for a long time, then stepped over it, kneeling beside the wounded man. "What were you planning to do?" she asked, voice steady. The man looked up, blinking in the sunlight. "They want you dead," he whispered. "I just wanted to see the woman worth the bounty." She stood, looked back at the rancher. "We're not hiding anymore," she said. "We end this now." And just like that, her running was over. Not because they stopped chasing her, but because she finally turned around to face them. They buried the man out past the cottonwood grove. No marker, no sermon, just earth and silence, and the wind moving through the dry grass like an old hymn. The rancher said nothing as he filled the grave, and Ada didn't ask what would come next. She already knew. That evening, she stood by the gate with a brush in her hand and a tin of faded paint, staring at the old wooden sign that had hung crooked since she arrived. It read, "Jameson Ranch," in chipped letters, barely legible anymore. She touched the wood gently, then began painting, slow, careful strokes, not to erase what was, but to add what now belonged. The next morning the sun rose gold and slow, and the land looked changed somehow, though nothing had moved. The gate now read, "Jameson and Merriweather." She hadn't asked permission, and he hadn't needed her to. When the rancher saw it, he said only, "Looks like it was always there." She smiled softly and said, "Maybe it was." Word spread faster than wildfire in a dry field. By the end of the week, the deputy returned, not with a posse, not with chains, but with a note in his pocket and a different look in his eyes. "Marshal back east says the charges are cold," he said, tipping his hat. "No one wants a war over a woman who stitched up a few bleeding kids." He paused, then added, "I reckon you've done more good out here than harm." He turned to leave, then stopped. "You keep your nose clean, both of you." Ada nodded, her chin held high, the pistol still at her hip. As the deputy rode off, she turned to the rancher and said, "I don't know how to live free." "Not really." He smiled that same tired, gentle smile he wore the night he gave her his coat. "Then we'll learn together." The land didn't soften overnight, nor did the ghosts vanish. But the bunkhouse was no longer empty, and the main cabin held 2 mugs instead of 1. They worked side by side, mending fences, raising foals, trading eggs for sugar and flour. When the storms came, they leaned into them, together. When the stars came out, they sat close, never speaking of the past unless it asked to be remembered. And every time someone rode past the new gate and saw her name carved beside his, there was no mistaking it anymore. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't borrowed. She wasn't tolerated. She was home. And the land, wild and scarred like both of them, had finally made room for her story too.